Now, the federal government's mantra of late has been all about jobs and growth, but the latest economic figures aren't particularly rosy. The national accounts show the Australian economy grew by 0.2% in the 3 months to June. This takes the annual growth rate to 2%. Today's figures are below trend. Now, to discuss this and other issues, I'm joined by the Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann, live from Western Australia. Good afternoon, Minister.
Good afternoon, good to be here.
Your government has repeatedly said that jobs and growth are the focus for the government. So what's behind today's sluggish figures, do you think?
Well, the good news is that our economy continues to grow despite the biggest fall in our terms of trade in about 50 years. This is when other commodity-based economies like Canada and Brazil are in recession. So we had 0.9% growth in the first quarter, 0.2% growth in this quarter, on average now real growth of 2.5% over the 14-15 financial year, which is in line with budget expectations. And of course, the very good news is that employment growth is actually performing more strongly than had been anticipated, and the unemployment rate ended up lower than anticipated at the end of the 14-15 financial year.
But I guess 2% growth over the past year, do you think that is truly a good result for the nation?
Well, it is a much better result than we would have had if we had not changed some of the job-destroying policies of the previous Labor government. We would be in a worse position today if we had not got rid of the mining tax, if we had not got rid of the carbon tax, if we had not reduced red tape costs for business by more than $2 billion a year, if we had not signed free trade agreements with key countries in our region, including China. And I hear today that Bill Shorten is still using weasel words in relation to that very important deal for jobs and growth in Australia moving forward.
Just back to today's results, do you think that they're a blip, or is this the new normal for our nation? Does Australia need to rethink what normal growth rates actually are or should be?
Well, we are an economy in transition, and we are dealing with the biggest fall in our terms of trade in about 50 years. And that is why it is so pleasing that we continue to grow. The economy continues to grow. The economy in 14-15 grew in line with budget expectations at an average of about 2.5% real growth in 14-15. Nominal growth actually was slightly better than what was expected at budget time, and employment growth in particular was performing quite a bit better than had been anticipated, which is why, of course, the unemployment rate is lower than had been anticipated, which is consistent with what Reserve Bank Governor Glenn Stevens has been saying in recent times as well.
You mentioned the budget there. Given the external pressures that currently are being put onto the federal budget, is now the right time to be flagging income tax cuts and ruling out new taxes like the bank deposit tax, which you did yesterday?
Well, we want to improve our tax system, and that is a central part of our plan for stronger growth and more jobs. Right now, income tax rates in Australia are very high by international standards, and obviously we want to ensure that our tax system is the most competitive and the most efficient it can be, that the necessary revenue for government is raised in the most efficient, least distorting way in the economy, and tax reform is a very important part of that. And between now and the election, we will be putting forward our very comprehensive tax reform package for the Australian people to consider.
OK. On the bank deposit tax in particular, were you initially in favour of this measure?
No, that is not correct, and there's stories that were written up at various times by various journalists were always wrong. Our position has been consistent. We were very sceptical, and when Labor announced this tax, when they were in government, in their final weeks in government in 2013, we then said we at that time laid out the process by which we would consider the way forward in relation to this Labor tax on people's bank savings. We said we would consider our approach in the context of the financial systems inquiry. After the financial systems inquiry considered that particular Labor proposal, and the Financial Systems Inquiry recommended against it. Yesterday we made a decision not to proceed with this labour tax on bank accounts because we think it's the wrong way forward.
The revenue raised by this tax would have gone into a stability fund to essentially cover the cost in the unlikely event of a default or a major banking meltdown. If that does come to pass in the future, who's going to pay? Who's going to foot the bill for that? It'll have to be taxpayers, won't it?
Well, you talk about the unlikely event, and of course since then what we've done is further improved prudential regulation. I mean, the way to avoid future bank failures is not by setting up a big capital fund, by raiding people's savings in their bank accounts. It is by making sure that the banks are adequately and well regulated. And of course the Financial Systems Inquiry has had a lot to say about this. The banks in recent times have been required to increase their capital reserves to ensure that there is appropriate security and safety when it comes to the bank's viability into the future. This tax that Labor proposed, initiated and banked in their last budget update was always just a grab for cash. Labor in government was always spending too much. They were always on the back foot. They were always facing budget deterioration after budget deterioration. It was another grab for cash, targeting people's bank account savings, and we made a very clear decision that we are not going to proceed with this Labor tax on people's bank accounts.
OK, Minister, on another issue, one of your colleagues, Peter Dutton, said yesterday that Fairfax Media is engaged in a bit of a holy war against the government. Do you agree? Are the media out to get and bring down the coalition government?
Look, I'm not a commentator. I'm focused every single day on my job, which is to help build a stronger, more prosperous economy, to help put Australia on a stronger economic and fiscal foundation for the future.
But have you personally been annoyed by these regular high-level leaks from your government?
You can ask the question whatever way you want. I'm focused on my job, which is as part of the economic team to work with the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, my cabinet colleagues and all of my parliamentary colleagues in the coalition on strengthening growth, creating more jobs and making sure we get the budget back into good shape. OK,
you've been working hard at the moment in the WA seat of Canning ahead of this month's by-election. Your party holds this seat by about 11%. What would be an acceptable swing against the government in WA?
We have an outstanding candidate representing the Liberal Party here in Canning, in Andrew Hastie. He has got some big shoes to fill because Don Randall was a very effective and very highly regarded local member of Parliament here. But Andrew Hastie is working hard to win the trust of the people of Canning, to represent them in the federal Parliament. We are working on winning.
All right, Matthias Cormann, thanks very much for joining Capitol Hill.
Always good to talk to you.